Okay, we're here at the bottom of page 4 for section 2.5. Got a couple more problems here, and once we get to page 5, we'll turn that example into a try problem for you, so you get some practice at home and so that we have something to discuss in class. But if any of these are tripping you up, please make a note of it and bring it to class. Ask somebody near you, and if that's not helping, let's do it in front of everybody and at the podium when I'm up there talking through these pages again. Okay, that's what we're there for when we have class time, is to be able to interact together over these problems and get everybody's questions answered. Okay, so bring those questions to class. A rectangular field is 5 times as long as it is wide. If the perimeter of the field is 288 yards, what are the field's dimensions? So deep cleansing breath. Read it again. A rectangular field, 5 times as long as it is wide, period. First sentence, we're going to start to learn that that means that's one equation right there. That's one little story that it's trying to tell. Second sentence, if the perimeter of the field is 288 yards, what are the field's dimensions? So this second sentence not only gives us a second clue to what's happening, but it also involves our goal in here. So our goal is to find the field's dimensions, which is a fancy way of saying we need to find the length and the width. And I take the time to write this out because then I know when I can stop and when I have to keep going. So again, there's 2 answers here. I need to find length and width. On the exam, we might have a problem like this, but I might narrow it down and say find the width or find the length. It's going to be super critical that you keep track of which is which and that you also know when you can stop. Okay, so it may be that you found the length, but I asked for the width, or vice versa. So be very, very careful. Being able to read carefully, follow directions, that's a life skill that you're going to want to take with you. You may not ever have to do this type of problem out in your real life, but you are going to have to read directions. You are going to have to follow them carefully. You are going to have to come up with the answer that the question was asking for. Those are skills that math will help train you in, that you can take to whatever field you're going to be involved in for your job or for your career or whatever your passion is. All right, back to this. I'm off my soapbox. Here we go. Let's read it now, looking for, so we got our goal. Now we're looking for some key words that kind of pop out here. So it's a rectangular field. Anytime, this is me, but I think this is good advice for just about anybody. Anytime a description starts to create a picture in your mind, or they're describing something that you have the ability to sketch out. And I'm no artist, but it does me a world of good to try to draw out what they're describing, to take all these words and put it in a form that makes more sense to me. Okay, so rectangular field is 5 times as long as it is wide. So I've got a rectangular field that has a width and it has a length. So it's 5 times as long as it is wide. If I'm not sure how to translate that, if I'm looking at that phrase, 5 times as long as it is wide, and I'm wondering, what does that mean? Which one is being multiplied by 5, the length or the width? I try some simple numbers. So if my width is 2 and it's 5 times as long as it is wide, the length would be 5 times that, the length would be 10. Or if my width was 3, it's 5 times as long as it is wide, the length is 5 times its width there, so I multiply by 5, I get 15. So since I don't know these values, I'm just trying simple numbers to help me make sense of what this phrase is. I take my width, I multiply it by 5, that gives me my length. So I take my width, I multiply it by 5, and that gives me my length. What I've created here is one of the clues, okay? So this first sentence gave me my first clue, which is a way of saying it gave me my first equation. You can expect that these story problems sometimes will be translated into 2 equations that you then have to substitute in. Not all the time. Sometimes you can get them to 1 equation right away, but sometimes there's 2. Okay. Now, after the period, I look again. If the perimeter of the field is 288 yards, what are the field's dimensions? So here's that second clue, perimeter of the field. Okay. This is an example of what I like to describe as BYOF. Bring your own formula. I am very persistent about the skill of being able to memorize something. And I think a lot of us were brought up not being asked to memorize. You could always have a note card, you could always have a list, you could always have a calculator, you could always have something to kind of rely on. And I think we did ourselves a disservice. We didn't exercise that part of our brain that can memorize. Our brain can remember an amazing amount of stuff. We just have to start working those muscles, those connections in our brain that will allow us to memorize something. So I'm going to push you a little bit this term. I'm not going to allow you to have notes on your exams. You're going to have some things available in your memory and bring those with and apply them when they're needed. So this is an example of a BYOF problem. You may have to bring something to the problem to make this happen. In this case, perimeter. And perimeter means to add up the sides. Okay, area is when you multiply, but a rectangular field would have 4 sides. It's going to have 2 widths and it's going to have 2 lengths. So the perimeter here is going to be 2 of the lengths added together plus 2 of the widths, or we could write that as 2 lengths plus 2 widths. L plus W plus W, or 2L plus 2W. And they tell us that the perimeter is 288 yards, okay? This is given in the problem. I remember in geometry, we'd hear this a lot, but you'll hear it in algebra too, especially depending on what your instructor, how they talk. But there's things that are given to you in the problem, and then there's things you bring to the problem. So we brought the 2L plus 2W, the formula for perimeter, but they gave us what that totaled up to, 288. Okay? Now again, if you just looked at this, 2L plus 2W equals 288, we don't have enough information just from this one equation to solve it. We would end up having to guess, like, well, let's try 1 for L and see what we get for W, see if it works. Let's try. That's where that first clue comes in. Okay, so that was our first equation, the first sentence. Here's our second sentence, which really was a second clue to how these things relate to each other. That's the big deal, that these two variables are related to each other. So I used L and W for my length and width here. It's the second clue of how they relate to each other, which in turn allowed us to translate into a second equation. So now we're going to use the method that we did up above, where we substitute one equation into the other. Okay, so we're going to take this L equals 5W and we're going to replace the L in our second equation with 5W. Okay, so instead of having 2L plus 2W equal to 288, I have another way to talk about L. Length is 5 times the width. The length is 5 times as long as the width, so that's going to go in right here, 5W. Okay. Make sure that part makes sense. That's a huge skill. The translating is part of it, but then what do you do with those two translated equations? Our goal in Math 60 is to combine them into one equation. Okay. Now I've got my equation. I've got one variable, so now I'm going to start my solving process. Okay. With one variable, now you're talking about 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, the beginning part of chapter 2. Now we solve. And our first step in solving is get rid of any parentheses. And in this case, we're not distributing, we're just multiplying, because it's just 5 times W. Distribution happens when there's a plus or minus inside that parentheses, and it can't be simplified further. But this is just strictly 2 times 5 times W, and that's just going to give you 10W plus 2W equals 288. I've checked for parentheses, and I've checked for like terms. 288's all by itself, no worries. On the left, though, 10W and 2W are like terms. Let's combine those to 12W. And I'm quickly running out of space. Gee. I undo what's happening to W now, and it's being multiplied by 12, so I'm going to divide by 12. And I'm going to write my answer over here. W is equal to 288 divided by 12. That is going to give you an answer of, where did I write that? It's going to go in 24 times. Okay, so our width is 24. And yards, okay, 24 yards. But I'm not done yet. I found my width, my W, but I need to find my length. That's where we use, we substitute again into the first equation to find our second answer. So we know L is equal to 5 times our W, so we'll put in 24 for W there, and 5 times 24 is going to give us 120. So our length is 120 yards. Okay, I'm going to stop this video, and then we'll zoom in on the bottom of the page, maybe a little bit more if we can, but we'll do that one in a separate video, that number 40 at the bottom.